have no time to love.
On a gravel road outside Clarksdale, the music started after sundown. You could hear it before you saw the building, a guitar bending through pine walls, a screen door on one hinge, and behind it all, the smell of fish frying in cast iron that had not been washed with soap in 40 years. That smell was the real invitation. The Juke joint was never just about the blues. It was a kitchen with no menu, where the woman cooking decided what you ate. Number 14 on this list kept bodies moving on a Saturday night when nothing else could. Number 7 came straight from a river less than a mile from the back door. And number 11 was so simple that most people never gave it a second thought. The grocery chains never stocked it. The cookbooks never printed it. Hit subscribe, because this is the food that built the Mississippi Delta before anyone thought to write it down. Here are 25 soul foods served at Mississippi Juke joints. Number 25, fried buffalo fish. In the Delta, the buffalo was never the animal on the plains. It was a thick, bony fish pulled from the Yazoo River and the Oxbow Lakes that dotted the floodplain from Greenville to Vicksburg. Juke joint cooks scored the flesh in tight crosshatch patterns, salted it heavy, rolled it in cornmeal, and dropped it into lard so hot it barely sputtered. The scoring was the secret. It turned the tiny pin bones into something crisp enough to chew through. Nobody filleted a buffalo fish. That would have been an insult to the woman who taught you how to eat one. You picked it up with your hands, pulled the meat from the spine, and left the bones on a piece of newspaper. A plate cost less than $1 well into the 1980s. Today, most people under 50 have never heard of it. Number 24, mustard greens with smoked ham. Collards got the fame, but mustard greens were the cook's preference in the hill country joints east of the Delta. The leaves were sharper, almost peppery, and they cooked down faster, which mattered when you were feeding people between sets. A ham bone went into the pot before noon. By the time the first guitar player showed up, the greens had gone soft and the potlikker was dark enough to drink from a cup. Some cooks added a splash of vinegar at the end. Others dropped in a dried chili pepper for heat. The greens came on a plate next to cornbread, and nobody asked for a fork. You folded the cornbread, scooped, and ate. Number 23, pinto beans. In a Delta Juke joint, pinto beans were Monday food and Saturday food and every day in between. A 2-pound bag cost pennies. The cook soaked them overnight, added whatever smoked meat was left from the week, salt, black pepper, and onion cut in half, and let the pot work for hours. There was no recipe. The beans were done when the cook said they were done. Served over rice with a square of cornbread on the side, a plate could feed a man through a night of dancing. Most joints charged 50 cents, sometimes a quarter if you were a regular. The taste changed every time because the meat was never the same twice. Number 22, fried dill pickles. The origin story has been claimed by a dozen places, but the oldest credible account points to the Hollywood Cafe in Robinsonville, Tunica County, where the kitchen started battering and frying dill pickle slices in 1969. The idea was simple enough that it spread through every roadhouse and juke joint within 100 miles inside a decade. You slice the pickles thin, dredge them in seasoned flour, sometimes cornmeal, and drop them into the fryer beside whatever fish was going that night. The acid of the pickle cut through the heaviness of everything else on the plate. That was the trick. In a kitchen built around lard and salt, the fried pickle was the only thing with bite. They cost almost nothing to make, and the cook lost nothing if they did not sell. Number 21, white beans and rice. Great northern beans or navy beans simmered with a piece of salt pork until they turned creamy and started to fall apart. The rice was cooked separately, always long grain, and it went on the plate first. The beans went on top. A good juke joint cook made the beans thick enough that they did not run off the rice. Thin beans meant the cook was stretching. Thick beans meant she was generous. In the hill country joints around Holly Springs, the plate came with a raw onion sliced in rings on the side. You ate the onion with the beans, and nobody said a word about your breath. There was nowhere to go but home. Number 20, pan-fried pork chops. The pork chop was the backbone of a Saturday night juke joint plate, not a thick-cut chop from a butcher counter. A thin, bone-in chop, pounded flat with the side of a cleaver, seasoned with salt, black pepper, and garlic powder, dredged through flour, and fried in a cast-iron skillet with enough lard to come halfway up the side, the edges crisped until they curled. The bone stuck out past the plate. 2 chops, a scoop of rice, and a ladle of gravy made a plate that held a man through a night of dancing and drinking. Nobody sat down to eat in most joints. You stood at the counter, ate fast, and went back to the floor. The chops were cooked in batches, and when they were gone, they were gone. No second round. Here's something worth saying out loud. The Mississippi juke joint was never a business in the way most people understand that word. There was no lease, no health inspection, no liquor license. A woman with a shotgun house and a strong arm opened her front room on a Friday night, moved the furniture against the wall, and started cooking. The music came because the food came first. Robert Johnson did not play juke joints because they had stages. He played them because someone was frying fish in the back and people gathered where the food was. The building was secondary. The cook was primary. Every dish on this list exists because a woman decided her kitchen was big enough to feed a crowd, and nobody from any government office ever told her she could or could not do it. That was the economy of the Delta, invisible, untaxed, and alive every Saturday night. Number 19, cornbread dressing. This was not Thanksgiving food in a juke joint. This was year-round food made from leftover cornbread that had gone too dry to eat on its own. The cook crumbled it by hand into a deep pan, mixed in chopped onion, celery if she had it, sage from the yard, salt, pepper, and enough chicken broth to make the whole thing hold together when you pressed it with a spoon. It baked in the oven until the top crusted over and the inside stayed soft and almost wet in the center. Cornbread dressing in the Delta was never stuffed inside a bird. It was baked in its own pan, cut into squares, and served alongside whatever meat was on the plate that night. The juke joint version was denser than the holiday kind. It had to be. A loose, fluffy dressing would fall apart on a paper plate held in one hand while the other held a jar of whiskey. The dressing had to be firm enough to eat, standing up, without a table, without a proper fork. Some cooks added ground pork sausage to the mix, the kind that came loose in a paper wrapper from the man who butchered hogs on the edge of town. Others put in a handful of pecans cracked from the tree in the side yard. One cook in Bentonia was known for pressing a chopped hard-boiled egg into the center of each serving, so when you broke it open, you found something you did not expect. That was not a garnish. That was a message. It meant the cook was thinking about each plate individually, not just feeding a crowd. The dressing soaked up the drippings from whatever sat next to it, which meant it tasted different every night. Next to pork chops, it tasted like pork. Next to fried fish, it picked up the cornmeal and salt. Nobody wrote that recipe down. It existed in the hands of the woman who made it, and it died when she stopped cooking. Number 18, catfish stew. Not fried, not blackened, stewed. In the joints closer to the river, where the catch came in fresh every morning, a cook would take the catfish that were too small to fillet and drop them whole into a pot with tomatoes, onions, potatoes, and a heavy hand of cayenne. The stew cooked low for hours until the fish fell apart and the bones softened enough to swallow. You ate it with a spoon, straight from a bowl, with cornbread balanced on the rim. This was the food that came before the fried catfish plate became the standard. Before restaurants figured out how to charge $12 for a fillet, the stew was what a juke joint cook made when she had more fish than flour. It was cheaper, it went further, and it warmed you on a January night when the walls had no insulation. Number 17, sweet potato, cobbler. Not sweet potato pie, cobbler. The difference mattered. A pie required a proper crust rolled out on a clean surface with a rolling pin and patience. A cobbler just needed batter poured over the top and shoved into the oven. In a juke joint kitchen that was already frying pork chops and boiling greens, cobbler was the dessert that took care of itself. The sweet potatoes were peeled, sliced, layered in a pan with brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a few pats of butter. The batter went over the top thick and simple, just flour, sugar, milk, and a little vanilla. It baked until the edges bubbled up golden and the center stayed soft enough to need a spoon. A slice cost $0.25. Nobody turned it down. Number 16, neck bones and spaghetti. This combination confused people who did not grow up with it. Pork neck bones, browned in a skillet, and then braised in tomato sauce for 3 or 4 hours until the meat pulled away from the bone with no effort. The spaghetti cooked separately and went on the plate underneath. The sauce from the neck bones served as the topping. There was no parmesan, no basil, no garlic bread on the side. This was not Italian food. This was Delta food that borrowed the noodle and made it something else entirely. The dish showed up in juke joints because it stretched. A few pounds of neck bones, the cheapest cut at any market, could sauce enough spaghetti to feed 30 people. The bones themselves were the prize. You gnawed them clean and stacked them on the side of the plate like a small wall. Number 15, meatloaf plate. Juke joint meatloaf was not the tidy loaf from a suburban kitchen. It was ground beef, seasoned with onion, bell pepper, salt, and enough black pepper to make you cough if you stood too close while it baked. The glaze was ketchup mixed with a spoonful of brown sugar, painted on top during the last 20 minutes. It came out of the oven dark and cracked on top, sliced thick and served with white bread and whatever vegetable was in the pot that day. You did not need a knife. You broke it apart with a fork, pressed it onto the bread, and ate it like a sandwich. Nobody ever called it elegant. Nobody needed to. Here is the uncomfortable truth the grocery industry does not advertise. Every dish in a juke joint kitchen was built from what the regular economy threw away. Neck bones, oxtails, organ meats, bottom shelf cuts that a white-owned grocery store put on the back rack because nobody with a choice would buy them. The juke joint cook did not choose those cuts out of creativity. She chose them because they were what she could afford, and then she made them taste better than anything on the front rack. That is not an exaggeration. It is the central fact of Southern Black cooking. The skill required to turn a neck bone into something worth fighting over is greater than the skill required to grill a ribeye. The Delta knew this. The rest of the country is only now beginning to understand it, and the women who did the work never saw $1 of the credit. Number 14, smothered oxtails. The oxtail was the cut that defined a juke joint kitchen. Thick discs of bone surrounded by rich, collagen-heavy meat that required nothing but time and patience to become extraordinary. The cook seasoned them with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and onion powder, browned them hard in a cast iron skillet until the outside was nearly black, then transferred them to a heavy pot with sliced onions, a little flour stirred into the fat, and enough water or stock to come halfway up the sides. The lid went on, the heat went to its lowest setting, and the pot sat there for 4 or 5 hours until the meat fell from the bone and the gravy thickened into something closer to a sauce than a broth. Served over rice, the oxtails came to the plate in a pile, bones and all. You ate them with your hands. You picked up each disc, pulled the meat with your teeth, and sucked the marrow from the center of the bone. The gravy soaked into the rice and turned it brown. Nobody needed to tell you when a plate of oxtails was good. The bone told you. If the meat slid off clean, the cook had earned her money. If you had to work for it, the pot had not sat long enough. A plate of smothered oxtails at a Delta Juke joint in the 1970s cost maybe $2. Today, oxtails retail for $8 to $12 a pound at a grocery store when you can find them at all. That price shift tells the whole story of what happened to black food in America. The cuts that were considered waste when black cooks were the primary buyers became expensive once chefs in New York and Los Angeles discovered them. The woman who perfected the dish in a shotgun house outside Indianola never saw the price go up. By the time oxtails became fashionable, her kitchen was already dark. Number 13, pickled okra. A mason jar of pickled okra sat on the counter of nearly every juke joint in the hill country. The okra was picked small, no longer than a finger, packed tight into jars with garlic, dill, a dried chili, and a brine of vinegar, water, salt, and sugar. It kept for months without refrigeration, which mattered in a building that might not have had a working icebox. You pulled a pod out of the jar with your fingers and ate it between bites of fried fish or pork chops. The vinegar and salt cut through the grease. The snap of the pod was satisfying in a way that nothing else on the plate could match. The cook never charged for it. It was just there, like the music. Number 12, bread pudding with whiskey sauce. This was what happened to the bread that nobody ate during the week. Stale white bread, sometimes biscuits, torn into pieces and soaked in a mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and cinnamon until it softened into something that was no longer bread, but not yet cake. It baked in a deep pan until the top puffed and turned golden. The whiskey sauce came separately, made from butter, sugar, and whatever brown liquor was behind the counter. Nobody used good whiskey for the sauce. The cheap stuff worked better because it was harsher, and that harshness balanced the sweetness of the pudding. A spoonful of sauce went over the top, and the steam carried the smell of vanilla and bourbon through the entire room. It was dessert and a drink at the same time. Number 11, fried bream. In the Delta, bream meant bluegill, and bluegill meant a boy with a cane pole and a bucket walked to the nearest pond that morning. The fish was small, rarely bigger than a man's hand, and they came to the juke joint kitchen whole. The cook gutted them, scaled them, left the head and tail intact, rolled them in seasoned cornmeal, and fried them in the same lard that had been cooking fish all week. That lard was the seasoning. A week of frying built up layers of flavor in the oil that no spice rack could replicate. You ate the bream whole, the fins crisped into something edible, the tail snapped off and crunched between your teeth. The cheek meat, a tiny pocket behind the eye, was the sweetest bite on the fish, and the people who knew this were the people who had been eating bream since childhood. A plate of fried bream at a juke joint usually came with 5 or 6 fish piled on top of each other because one bream was not a meal. You needed the whole pile, and you ate them fast because the longer they sat, the soggier the cornmeal got. The sound inside a juke joint when the bream came out of the kitchen was unmistakable. Conversation dropped. People moved toward the counter. The fish did not last. A cook might fry 3 or 4 batches on a good night, and every batch sold out before the oil stopped popping. Nobody saved you a plate. You were there when the fish came out, or you went without. That was not cruelty. That was the math of a kitchen where the cook bought the cornmeal, but the fish came free from whoever brought them in. She could not afford to fry more than the pond provided. Number 10, rice and brown gravy. This was the plate you got when you had no money for meat, a scoop of white rice with a ladle of brown gravy over the top. The gravy was made from the drippings of whatever meat the cook had fried earlier that night. Flour stirred in until it thickened. Salt, pepper, and water stretched to fill the pot. It was the ghost of the pork chop, the memory of the fried chicken. The rice soaked it up and turned it into something that tasted richer than it had any right to be. A plate of rice and gravy cost almost nothing, and some joints gave it away free to anyone who looked like they needed it. That was not charity. That was the rule of the house. Number 9, pralines, not the creamy New Orleans kind. Mississippi Juke joint pralines were harder, darker, cooked in a saucepan with brown sugar, butter, evaporated milk, and whole pecans until the mixture reached a temperature that turned it brittle when it hit the wax paper. The cook dropped them in spoonfuls and let them cool on the counter next to the cash jar. By the time the music started, they were hard enough to crack when you bit into them. Most people bought 2 or 3 wrapped in wax paper to take home. The pecans came from trees in the yard or from a neighbor's property, gathered in a bucket by whoever had the time during the fall. The sugar and butter were the only things the cook had to buy. Here's something most food historians leave out. The Juke joint kitchen had no separation between the sacred and the secular. The same woman who fried fish for a Saturday night crowd cooked the church dinner on Sunday afternoon. The same skillet, the same recipes, the same hands. The only difference was the building and who was watching. This mattered because it meant the food carried no shame. A plate of smothered oxtails, eaten at midnight with a jar of moonshine on the table, was the same plate served after the sermon the next day with sweet tea in its place. The church never condemned the food. The food was innocent. What the church had opinions about was the music and the drinking, but the cooking was beyond judgment. That dual life gave Juke joint food a kind of moral protection that kept it alive even as the joints themselves began to disappear. Number 8, chicken spaghetti. This was not the neck bones and spaghetti from earlier on this list. This was a different dish entirely. The cook boiled a whole chicken until the meat fell off the bone, shredded it by hand, and mixed it with cooked spaghetti, a can of tomatoes, diced onion, bell pepper, and a block of processed cheese melted into the sauce. The whole thing went into a baking dish and into the oven until the top browned and the cheese formed a crust. It came out in squares, dense and heavy, cut like a casserole. One square was a full meal. The dish existed because it solved a problem. A single chicken could feed a dozen people if you stretched it through enough spaghetti. The cheese held it all together and made it taste like something more expensive than it was. Number 7, fried crappie. White crappie, pulled from the oxbow lakes of the Delta, was considered the finest freshwater eating fish in Mississippi. Better than catfish, better than bream. The flesh was white, flaky, and mild enough that the cornmeal crust carried most of the flavor. A Juke joint that served crappie was advertising something. It meant someone in the kitchen had a connection to a fisherman who knew where the beds were. Crappie were harder to catch than bream and smaller than catfish, which made them rarer on a Juke joint plate. When they appeared, word traveled. People showed up who had not been to that joint in months. The cook handled them carefully, dredging them lightly, frying them fast at high heat so the flesh stayed moist inside the crust. Overcooked crappie turned to mush. There was no forgiveness in the fish. Number 6, blackberry wine. Every road in the Delta had blackberry bushes growing wild along the ditches, and every cook with a Juke joint knew how to turn them into wine. The berries were mashed, mixed with sugar and water in a crock or a 5-gallon bucket, and left to ferment for weeks in a back room. The result was sweet, strong, and deep purple. almost black. It stained your teeth and your fingers and the glass you drank it from. Most joints charged less for the wine than for the store-bought whiskey because the only cost was the sugar. The berries were free. The time was free. The skill was passed from mother to daughter without a written word. It was never legal to sell, and nobody cared. Number 5, cornbread and buttermilk. This was a glass, not a plate. You crumbled cold cornbread into a tall glass, poured buttermilk over it, and ate it with a spoon. In a juke joint, it was the meal between meals, the thing you ate before the real food came out or after the kitchen closed down for the night. The buttermilk was tangy and cold, the cornbread soft and grainy, and together they made something closer to a savory pudding than to anything you could name. Old men in the Delta called it supper. It cost nothing because the cornbread was already made and the buttermilk was always in the icebox. If the cook liked you, she handed you a glass without being asked. If she did not know you, you did not get one. It was never on a menu because there was never a menu. Number 4, stewed chicken and rice. The chicken was an old hen, too tough for frying, cut into pieces and browned in a skillet before going into a pot with water, onion, salt, pepper, and a bay leaf. It simmered for hours until the meat was tender enough to cut with the side of a fork. The gravy formed on its own from the fat and the flour the cook had dusted on the chicken before browning it. It was thin, not thick, and it pooled around the rice on the plate like a broth with purpose. This was the dish a juke joint cook made on a weeknight when nobody expected a crowd. It stretched, it reheated, it tasted better the second day than the first. The hen cost almost nothing because nobody else wanted a bird that old. Number 3, turnip greens, stronger than collards, more bitter than mustard greens, and favored in the red Clay Hill country joints east of the Delta, where the soil grew turnips better than anything else. The greens were washed in the sink 3 times to get the grit out, torn by hand, and cooked in a pot with a smoked ham hock or a piece of salt pork for 2 or 3 hours until they were dark and soft. The bitterness mellowed but never disappeared entirely. That was the point. The bite at the back of the tongue told you these greens had character. Some cooks saved the turnip roots, sliced them thin, and added them during the last 30 minutes. Others threw the roots to the hogs. It depended on the cook, and the cook's word was final. Number 2, peach brandy. Where the blackberry wine was sweet and heavy, the peach brandy was clear and sharp enough to make your eyes water. It was made from overripe peaches that had fallen from the tree, fermented and distilled in a copper still hidden somewhere on the property or a neighbor's land. A juke joint that served the peach brandy was offering something the liquor store could not match. The flavor of a local peach, a specific orchard, a specific summer trapped in a mason jar. It's sold by the poor, poured into a short glass with no measurement. The cook or the man behind the counter eyeballed it and charged what felt fair. It was never the same strength twice. Number 1, the woman behind the skillet. She did not have a restaurant. She did not have a business license. She did not have a line of credit or a lease or a health permit. She had a cast iron skillet, a knife, a stove, and the knowledge that had been passed to her by the woman who stood at that stove before her. She opened her house on a Friday or Saturday night, moved the chairs against the wall, set the skillet on the flame, and fed whoever walked through the door. The juke joint existed because she decided it did. The music came because the food came first. Every dish on this list was invented, perfected, and served by a woman whose name was never written in any cookbook. She was not a chef. She was not a businesswoman. She was the engine of a parallel economy that fed the Delta for 100 years. And when she stopped cooking, the joint went dark. Number 23, potlikker poured over cornbread. Potlikker was the broth left behind after greens cooked down for 2 hours with a piece of fatback. Most white kitchens of the era poured it down the drain. In a sharecropper kitchen, it was the meal. A wedge of crumbled cornbread went into a tin cup. The dark green liquid, thick with iron and pork fat, was ladled over the top. You ate it with a spoon, sopping every drop. The greens themselves came second. The liquor came first. WPA interviewers in 1938 noted that black children in the Delta often had stronger blood iron levels than their white neighbors. The home economists at the USDA traced it back to this single habit. Nothing was wasted. The juice was more nourishing than the leaf. If you grew up with a kitchen that poured its Potlikker over your cornbread, you know exactly what dignity tasted like. That mattered more than any cookbook ever explained. Number 22, leather breeches. Every fall across Appalachia and the Upper South, green beans were threaded onto long strings with a needle and hung from porch rafters or kitchen ceiling beams to dry in the air. They hung there for weeks, shriveling into tough, leathery strips that looked like nothing you would want to eat. The cookbooks called them leather breeches. When winter came, the dried beans were pulled down, soaked overnight, and simmered low with a ham hock or a piece of smoked side meat. After hours in the pot, they softened into something rich and deep with a concentrated flavor that fresh green beans could never match. The method came through the Caribbean and into the American South. Dehydration was preservation before refrigeration existed. The strings came down for good when chest freezers arrived. Fried catfish sandwiches turned river fish into roadhouse gold at Juke joints near waterways throughout the South. Fresh fillets were soaked in buttermilk to remove any muddy taste, then dredged in seasoned cornmeal spiked with cayenne and black pepper. Dropped into cast iron skillets filled with hot lard, the fish emerged golden and crunchy while the flesh stayed moist and flaky inside. Served on white bread with hot sauce and tartar sauce, these sandwiches delivered the protein that kept working people going through long nights. Catfish was abundant in southern rivers and cheap at local fish markets. The smell of frying fish competed with blues guitar and the slap of dominoes on wooden tables. For a quarter, customers could fill their stomachs and still have money left for beer. Neck bones and rice-filled plates at juke joints where the music played late and budgets ran thin. These bony cuts from pigs were simmered for hours in seasoned water until the meat fell away and the collagen melted into silky gravy, served over mounds of white rice that soaked up every drop of rich porky broth. This dish stretched to feed crowds on budgets that left nothing for waste. The bones held pockets of succulent meat that required gnawing and sucking to fully enjoy. Juke joint cooks started these pots early, letting them bubble while preparing for evening crowds. Neck bones cost almost nothing at the butcher because most customers didn't want them. But black cooks knew time and patience could transform cheap ingredients into something extraordinary. Number 21, sweet potato pone. Sweet potatoes were a traditional sharecropper crop because they yielded heavy on poor soil and stored well in a dirt cellar through the winter. A woman would grate raw sweet potato into a bowl, stir in cornmeal, a spoon of sorghum, and a little buttermilk if she had any. The mixture went into a hot cast iron skillet and baked beside the fire until the top crusted dark brown. The inside stayed soft and almost custard-like. Sweet potato pone was Sunday after church food in a kitchen that did not have sugar, butter, or eggs. It tasted like dessert because the sweet potato did the work no other ingredient could afford to do. A woman served it to her kin on a chipped plate with a glass of cold buttermilk, and that single slice could keep you full all afternoon. Children waited all week for it. It was a hug in a bowl when the bowl had almost nothing in it. Number 21, sweet potato pone. This was not sweet potato pie and not sweet potato casserole. Sweet potato pone was older than both. The recipe appeared in handwritten church cookbooks from the 1880s across Georgia, Alabama, and the Mississippi Delta. Raw sweet potatoes were grated by hand on a box grater, mixed with molasses, butter, eggs, and spices, then baked slow until the top cracked and the center set dense and dark, almost like a pudding. It took close to 2 hours in a wood-fired oven. The texture was heavy, somewhere between cornbread and fudge, and it was eaten warm with nothing on top. Grating enough sweet potato for a family of 8 meant raw knuckles and sore arms. When canned sweet potatoes and pre-made pie crust showed up in stores in the 1950s, sweet potato pone was one of the first recipes to drop out of the rotation. Nobody noticed until the hands that grated them were gone. Fried gizzards were the overlooked treasure that Juke joint regulars ordered by the bag or plate. These muscular organs from chickens were cleaned, boiled until tender, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried until the coating shattered with each bite. The texture inside was dense and meaty, unlike any other part of the bird, requiring serious chewing that made the eating last. Served in paper-lined baskets with hot sauce for dipping, gizzards cost almost nothing since they were considered offal that most Americans ignored. But African-American cooks knew gizzards delivered more flavor per penny than almost any other protein. Regulars would order them by the basket, picking at pieces while playing cards or watching others dance. This was soul food at its most practical. Pig ear sandwiches showed up on Juke joint menus as crispy, chewy proof that every part of the hog had value. The ears were cleaned, simmered until tender, then sliced and fried until the edges turned golden and crispy. The texture was unlike anything else, combining soft cartilage with chewy skin that required committed chewing. Sandwiched between white bread with hot sauce and pickles, pig ears delivered porky flavor in a form that announced you knew real soul food. These sandwiches cost almost nothing since ears were practically given away at butcher shops. For customers who grew up eating every part of the hog, pig ear sandwiches were comfort food and proof you understood the traditions that made Juke joint food special. Number 25, hot water cornmeal cakes. A cup of cornmeal, a pinch of salt, boiling water poured in until the meal turned into a thick paste. That was the whole recipe. A sharecropper's wife would scoop the paste into her palm, flatten it, and drop it into a cast iron skillet slick with bacon grease. The cakes hissed and crusted in under 3 minutes. Children ate them, standing up before walking the cotton row at sunrise. Hot water cornbread was the breakfast that did not need eggs, did not need milk, did not need anything the landowner controlled at the furnish store. You could make it with what you already had. A grandmother in Tallahatchie County made these every single morning of her working life from 1928 to 1962. Not because they were beautiful, because they were always possible. Back then, they were the meal you could rely on when the cupboard had given up everything else. Your grandmother called it breakfast. Number 19, hoe cake. The name was literal. Before the American Revolution, enslaved field workers cooked cornmeal batter on the flat blade of a garden hoe held over an open fire. There was no kitchen, no oven, no table. There was a tool meant for digging, repurposed for cooking, because it was the only flat piece of metal within reach. The earliest written references appear in Virginia plantation records from the 1700s, where overseers noted that enslaved people baked cakes on their hoes during midday breaks. By the early 1800s, hoe cake had migrated indoors. Cast iron griddles replaced the hoe blade, and the recipe appeared in nearly every Southern cookbook published before the Civil War. But the name stuck. Hoe cake, a word that carries inside it the full history of Black cooking in America, making something nourishing out of almost nothing, using tools that were never designed for the purpose. The batter itself was the simplest thing imaginable. Cornmeal, water, a pinch of salt, cooked flat until the edges brown. Some versions added a spoonful of lard. Some added buttermilk, but the original needed nothing more than meal, water, and heat. Abraham Lincoln reportedly ate hoe cakes as a child in Kentucky. Frederick Douglass wrote about them. The dish crossed every line of class and color in the antebellum South. And then it vanished. Not because it stopped tasting good, but because the name reminded people of something the country wanted to forget. The garden hoe hanging in the shed became just a garden tool again. The cake baked on it became just cornbread, and the people who invented it became a footnote in someone else's cookbook. Hot sausage sandwiches were the lifeblood of juke joint menus across the Delta and Deep South. Thick links of spicy pork sausage were grilled until the casing snapped and the fat rendered into crispy edges that sizzled on flat-top griddles. The sausages were split and pressed between slices of soft white bread, dressed with yellow mustard and sometimes pickles or onions. The heat from cayenne and black pepper cut through the richness of the pork, leaving mouths burning and customers reaching for cold drinks. These sandwiches cost pennies to make, but delivered bold flavor that matched the intensity of the blues playing on the jukebox. Workers coming off shifts could afford them on wages that barely stretched. The simplicity was the point, letting the spice and smoke speak for themselves. Pickled pig's feet sat in gallon jars on counters where smoke hung heavy and laughter echoed off wooden walls. These gelatinous, vinegar-soaked pieces of pork were pulled from brine with tongs and served on wax paper with saltine crackers. The meat was tender from hours of simmering before pickling, falling easily from small bones that required patience to navigate. The vinegar brine cut through the richness of the fat, creating flavor that was sour, salty, and deeply porky all at once. Pig's feet cost almost nothing since butchers considered them throwaway cuts. For African Americans who transformed every part of the hog into something delicious, pickled feet represented both economy and culinary tradition passed down through generations of resourceful cooks who wasted nothing. Number 22, molasses poured over a hot biscuit. This was the dish Fannie Lou Hamer remembered from her childhood on the W.D. Marlowe farm in Sunflower County, Mississippi, where she was born in 1917. Her mother would bake biscuits before dawn using flour bought on credit from the furnish store. A jar of dark sorghum or Brer rabbit molasses sat in the middle of the table. Each child got one biscuit split open with a slow stream of molasses poured into the center. The molasses softened the crumb. The biscuit caught the syrup. That was supper for a child too young to chop cotton. Hamer was the youngest of 20 siblings. Her family worked land they did not own and ate food the landowner counted against their share. Back then, by the time you turned 6, you were picking cotton beside your mother. The biscuit and molasses was the meal she remembered for the rest of her life, all the way to her death in 1977. Number 25, crackling bread. Before cornbread became a sweetened side dish at brunch restaurants, it was built around cracklings, the crunchy pieces of rendered pork skin left after hog killing day. The oldest community cookbooks called for a full handful stirred straight into the cornmeal batter. When the bread came out of the oven, every bite cracked with salt and smoke and fat. No sugar, no wheat flour, just cornmeal, cracklings, buttermilk, and a hot oven. A woman in rural Georgia could feed 6 people on one pan of it using ingredients she already had. Most cornbread in grocery stores today is closer to yellow cake than anything those old cookbooks described. The cracklings and the patience it took to render them are what the frozen aisle decided nobody needed anymore. Smothered pork chops were Sunday dinner brought to Saturday night at Juke joints across the rural South. Bone-in chops were seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, then dredged in flour and fried until golden. The chops were then covered in rich onion gravy made from pan drippings and sliced onions cooked until sweet. Simmered low until the meat turned fork tender, this dish delivered comfort that transcended the smoky Juke joint atmosphere. The gravy clung to every bite, demanding rice or bread for sopping. For customers missing their mother's or grandmother's cooking, smothered pork chops transported them back to family tables and Sunday afternoons where love was measured in how long the gravy simmered. Crackling bread appeared on Juke joint tables as the perfect companion to plates of greens and beans. Made from cornmeal batter studded with crispy pork cracklings, this bread carried smoky, salty richness in every bite. The cracklings were rendered from pork skin and fat until golden and crunchy, then folded into the batter before baking in cast iron. The result was bread with pockets of porky crunch that complemented the earthy sweetness of stone-ground cornmeal. Sold by the slice or square, crackling bread was cheap to make but rich enough to satisfy hunger on its own. The cracklings came from the same hogs that provided every other cut, ensuring nothing was wasted. This bread carried memories of country kitchens and family gatherings. Number 24, salt pork and field peas. The Brer Rabbit molasses tin sat on the same shelf as the salt pork bucket in most sharecropper kitchens of the 1930s. Field peas, sometimes called crouters or whippoor wills, were a tradition passed down from the old days, grown on the edge of the cotton patch where the landowner did not bother to count rows. A woman would simmer a handful of dried peas with a chunk of salt pork all afternoon while the fire burned low. The pork rendered into the broth. The peas softened into a thick, smoky stew. By dusk, the whole cabin smelled like Sunday dinner, even if it was a Tuesday in August. Field peas fed sharecropper families through the lean weeks between cotton chopping in June and cotton picking in September. They were planted in the spaces between the cash crop. They were grown on land nobody else wanted, and they kept your great-grandparents alive when the furnish account had nothing left to give. They were following a memory. Back to the list. Number 23, poke salad. The plant grew wild along fence rows and ditches across the South, and in spring, when the pantry was at its emptiest, women went out with a bucket and picked the young leaves before they turned toxic. Poke salad had to be boiled 3 separate times. The water poured off between each boil because the mature plant is poisonous. The old cookbooks were specific about this. 3 waters, no shortcuts. After the 3rd boil, the greens were fried in bacon grease with scrambled eggs. It was bitter, earthy, and free. The dish showed up in community cookbooks from East Tennessee to the Alabama Black Belt, always with the same warning about the 3 boils. Skip 1 and you would know it. Wild food foraging is trendy now, but for Black families in the rural South, it was Tuesday. Nobody called it foraging, they called it getting by. Red beans and rice anchored Monday menus at Juke joints following New Orleans traditions that spread across the South. Dried kidney beans were soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with ham hocks, onions, celery, and bell peppers until they broke down into creamy, smoky goodness. Served over long grain rice that absorbed the rich bean broth, this dish stretched one pot into enough food for dozens. Monday was the traditional day for red beans, born from letting beans simmer while doing laundry. Juke joints kept the tradition alive, offering plates that cost little but deliver complete protein and deep satisfaction. The smoky pork flavor, married with earthy beans, created something greater than humble ingredients suggested. For transplanted Southerners, this was home. Those 25 plates tell the story of a kitchen that was never meant to be remembered. The Mississippi Juke joint did not ask for preservation. It asked for $1 and gave back a meal that carried a century of survival in every bite. Try making one this week. Start with the pinto beans, start with the cornbread and buttermilk. Start with whatever your grandmother would recognize. Drop the dish your family turned into something nobody else could copy in the comments.